Welcome to the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast. I'm your host, Molly Watts. If you want to change your drinking habits and create a peaceful relationship with alcohol, you're in the right place. This podcast explores the strategies I use to overcome a lifetime of family alcohol abuse, more than 30 years of anxiety and worry about my own drinking, and what felt like an unbreakable daily drinking habit. Becoming an alcohol minimalist means removing excess alcohol from your life so it doesn't remove you from life. It means being able to take alcohol or leave it without feeling deprived. It means to live peacefully, being able to enjoy a glass of wine without feeling guilty and without needing to finish the bottle. With science on our side, we'll shatter your past patterns and eliminate your excuses. Changing your relationship with alcohol is possible. I'm here to help you do it. Let's start now. Well, hello and welcome back to the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast with me, your host, Molly Watts, coming to you from, well, my friends, it is a transitioning Oregon. We have had just cold, miserable, rainy weather, and guess what's on the horizon? That's right. We have 80 plus degree days coming down the pike here for the end of the week, and I am so excited. Cannot wait. And so today it's kind of one of those in-between days. There's a little bit of sun. I can see the ground is still wet, so we'll call it transitioning Oregon. How are you doing? Welcome back and welcome to the show. Before I get into this episode, I do have just a little bit of housekeeping to share with you, and I want to encourage you, if you haven't already picked it up, over on the website, I have my free resource, Alcohol Truths, How Much is Safe. And this is a free ebook. It also has a tool at the back side of it that helps you kind of do the start of habit assessment in terms of looking at your habit and how you're using alcohol right now, from how you're using it versus how you'd like to be using it, or a future use case. In terms of looking at it from your physical health, from your mental health, from your financial health, and just kind of a balance sheet, pros and cons of what it would look like to change. And so I really encourage you to go grab Alcohol Truths. Again, you can go to my website, www.mollywatts.com. Look for it. It'll either pop up for you, or you can look under mollywatts.com/resources to pick up Alcohol Truths. Today on the podcast, I am thrilled to have Debbie Hampton back on the show. Debbie was with us, and I will link her first episode here in the show notes. Debbie has such an interesting story, and she's written a new book that is all about mindfulness and how to use mindfulness to overcome anxiety and depression as a mental health tool. This book is, I don't even know how to describe it, folks. It's chock full of science. It's chock full of very useful mindfulness techniques. And she described it to me, said someone described it to her as the Bible. And I agree, the Bible of mindfulness. It really has so much reference information, practical information, and things that you'll just want to keep looking back at and as a resource in terms of building a practice of mindfulness. If you've been here around the show at all, you know that I say that what I teach is a meta skill. It's a meta skill for life. And really, it's all about mindfulness. Even though you may not like that terminology, or you may have heard the term mindfulness and think it's something else, really at its root, at its heart, the kind of mindfulness I talk about is being able to see your own thoughts and your own feelings and then take agency there. And that is what changing your relationship with alcohol and changing your relationship with yourself is all about. You are going to find this conversation, I hope, inspiring, and I will link everywhere where you can check out Debbie Hampton, Best Brain Possible. I share a lot of content from her on my Facebook group because really we got to be stewards of our brains and building our best brains possible. You're going to love my conversation. Here it is with Debbie Hampton. Good morning, Debbie. Thank you so much for being back on the Alcohol Minimalist podcast. This book is so amazing, and I just can't wait to share it with my audience. So thank you for coming back again.
Thanks for the invite, Molly. I'm happy to be here and share more information.
Yeah, right. And let's just call a spade a spade. There's a lot of information in this book. This book is not on the light side, is it? For meaty information, just a lot there.
I was proud of myself, and I do take pride in the fact that I'm not a neuroscientist or a professional with all kinds of initials after my name or a researcher, but this is a 300 and, like you said, I think 15-page book with 17 pages of scientific resources.
Yeah.
It is very fact-based and based on the current research that's available. Because what I intended to do, and one of the purposes of this book, is to bring mindfulness into the mainstream, into everybody's living room, and shed some of its stigma as an out there spiritual practice. It certainly can be, if that's what you want it to be. And it does have origins in Buddhism and Eastern religion. But the way that we've adapted it in the Western world can be removed from that and doesn't take anything away from it. And it can be simply a mental health tool, like anything else. And it's a mental health tool that's proving to be very scientifically advantageous for your mind, your mental health, and your physical health. And it doesn't cost anything.
Yeah.
It's not going to work for every single person for everything. Like some of the neurohype, it's become commercialized, like naked yoga. And I don't see much benefit in all that. But if that's your thing, great. But it's worth a try to see if it benefits you before you go to other extremes like medication or doing other therapies. It's something that's free that we all can adapt our minds, and it teaches us to, for me, it's empowering.
Yeah,
It gave me control over my mind. When I felt like a victim before, I felt like a leaf being blown around in the wind, and I just went whichever way the wind blew. A little bit of my backstory is I had depression, and I still tend to have anxiety. I don't think, because my nervous system is wired that way, I don't think the initial tendency to be anxious will ever go away. But I've learned how to manage it and live with it and guide my mind so that it doesn't affect my health in a negative way. And it really doesn't affect my life in a negative way anymore. And I don't get depressed anymore. I certainly have depressive thoughts and I have funks, but now I know how to pull myself out of those ruts and not make it worse. I know how to direct my mind to help myself and encourage myself. And that's what using mindfulness as a mental health tool is about.
What I appreciated most about this, not most, I appreciated many things about the book. Obviously, for my audience, we are really all about science. We're really science forward. We love the brain science. And the fact that you dove into the science and the research into something that I agree with you has become kind of commercialized, pop culturized, right? So mindfulness is definitely can be perceived as something that's very woo-woo and trendy and hip. Yet, if we're really doing our due diligence, then we learn that it's actually very rooted in science and it's very proven. And it's also just like you said, it's available to all of us. It's simple. It's things that you can do. I loved the fact too. So let's talk about in the very beginning of the book, you talk about kind of what mindfulness, I can't talk, what mindfulness is and what mindfulness isn't, right? Because I think we all, again, we do have some narratives that are around us that may or may not align with what really is the purpose of mindfulness in terms of as it applies to managing and helping ourselves be our mental health in terms of managing anxiety, managing depression, which is kind of where the genesis of this book came from, at least in terms of what I think you were aiming for. So let's talk about what that looks like. Give me your favorite part of what mindfulness is versus what mindfulness isn't. Because again, there's a lot of different options. There's a lot of different, and I mean, I guess one isn't necessarily right, one's wrong. But what do you think, or for you, what aligns with how you're using mindfulness?
Well, I will say that, like you said, mindfulness is a broad category at this point. It encompasses all kinds of things. It's an umbrella term, and each person needs to decide what mindfulness is for them and based on what works for them. So, my definition may not work for you or anybody else, and that's totally fine. But I do think there's enough different interpretations and variations. I mean, there's like a million flavors. It's like ice cream. There's a million flavors. And if one doesn't work for you, then try something else. I mean, and just because one doesn't work doesn't mean that mindfulness will not work. Right. It means that particular flavor that you tried didn't work. I would like to caution people that mindfulness is not synonymous with meditation.
Right. And you're clear. I loved that delineation in the book because I think people do kind of conflate the two.
And you hear the term used interchangeably a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because most of the studies, the scientific research done on mindfulness is done on mindfulness meditation. So the two terms become interchangeable a lot.
Mm-hmm.
in the medical information, but it's not always the same thing. Mindfulness is not sitting on a cushion for hours a day meditating. Mindfulness is something you can work into any activity during your day. You can eat mindfully, you can drive mindfully, you can take a shower mindfully, you can read mindfully, you can work mindfully. Mindfulness is about paying attention, and it's about directing your mind and being in control of where you put your attention, because that actually is what changes your brain neuroplastically. And another thing is mindfulness isn't about feeling good. Being mindful
Right.
doesn't mean you're automatically going to feel good.
Yeah. In fact, I think sometimes you might feel worse. You know what I mean? Because you're waking up, right?
Exactly. Mindfulness asks you to sit with your feelings,
right,
rather than run from them, avoid them, or engage in behaviors like alcohol or addiction or anything else that distracts you from feeling your feelings. And unknowingly, we develop those habits as we grow up. And so at first, mindfulness may feel worse because you're actually feeling a lot of uncomfortable feelings that you wouldn't have in the past. And mindfulness does not require a therapist or going to class. But if you do have a very traumatic past or a lot of pain and wounds, it may be best to start under the direction of a mental health professional that can help you navigate some of these feelings. Because if you're unprepared for them, it can be overwhelming. And you can actually not know what to do with them. So there is nothing wrong with starting under the guidance of a professional or in a group.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can go on your own. You don't have to stay under the guidance. So those are two of the biggest factors. Mindfulness is not meditation. Meditation is a form of mindfulness.
Right.
Mindfulness is not about feeling good. It's not a magic cure-all you whip out whenever things go bad. It's a way of life. It's a practice.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way of, it's like exercise for your brain.
Yeah.
It's a way of engaging your brain, which is actually going to physically change it. Its pathways, it calms your amygdala, which is your active survival part of your brain, so that it doesn't react as often and as strongly and as easily. For me, it's been a life changer.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you 100%. This is what I talk about all the time. A lot of what I talk about this, if you kind of like, I feel like I talk on the podcast, or the way I phrase it is more in the layman terms. And also you separate mindfulness based stress, MSBR or MBSR, whatever that versus mindfulness based cognitive therapy. I definitely here on the show and in my coaching world talk about really a mindfulness based cognitive behavioral therapy. And what I love about this is it's super important to understand mindfulness in the sense that we really do get to create and can create our feelings by the way that we interpret our own thinking, right? So what I love, and I was trying to find it in the book and I couldn't find it, the waterfall metaphor, and being able to look at your thoughts and your feelings, right? And that's one of the things that's what I love and I try to share with people is like, this is a uniquely human trait. Being able to look at our own thinking is what makes us humans, right? It's that beautiful prefrontal cortex, that logical area part of the brain that we tap into that allows us to be not just reactive, like where the amygdala lives, right? In that more primitive part of our brain, which is where the mammals tend to live, right? And so it's all such great stuff. And mindfulness is at its very heart. And I love that kind of what I got really from the book was at the heart of it, it is paying attention to all of it, right? Our thoughts, feelings, paying attention to how the brain is working, what's coming out. And it doesn't mean that, it's a pretty productive place, right? The brain's 60, 70,000 thoughts a day, not all of them, but being able to perfect or not perfect, because I don't think we ever get perfect at it, but practice a skill set that helps us get more in tune with what's going on, really separates us. And also for so many people, they are just acting by default. They're acting unconsciously. And that is really the kicker. That's really what helps. That's what really begins, whether it's battling mental health, anxiety, depression, addiction, or anything basically. And I think you talked about that too, the protocol from somebody who an obsessive compulsive disorder protocol using mindfulness to battle that. But really, for, like you said, for any pesky behavior that you're really trying to get rid of, right? I think that's what's the beauty of all of this. And again, I folks, there's so much in this book that I honestly I'm trying to get myself to follow the course of it, but I found it to be so useful. And I hope that you hear me on this. There is so much there. Each and every chapter, there's something there. And whether it's practicing a new skill set, whether it's reading the science and understanding how useful it is. It's great stuff. So sorry, that was a long diatribe, but I love the focus on, I guess, what I would call metacognition, like looking at your own thinking and looking at your feelings.
Well, thanks. I love to hear that, Molly. And the waterfall reference that you made was, I explained mindfulness. One way to explain it is, okay, in life, okay, is like standing in a waterfall, and the water is beating down, and it's pressure, and you can't hear anything outside of it. And mindfulness is like stepping outside of the waterfall and observing it.
Right.
It's still happening.
Right. Can't stop the waterfall, but you can look at it, right? You can see
it's not beating you up, and it's not impacting your life directly. You can observe it. And that's what mindfulness is like. It's paying attention, as you said. Harvard did a study back in 2010 where they gave people a phone app, and they checked in with them just at random times during the day and asked them 3 questions. What are you doing? Are you paying attention to it? And how do you feel? And they found that like 47% of the time, almost half, people were not paying attention to what they were doing. I mean, we all do that. We drive somewhere and we don't even remember the drive over there. Or you're working and your mind is on what you have to do tonight.
Right.
I mean, there are a million examples. You're cooking dinner and your mind is on the bills. I mean, our mindfulness is about paying attention. And what they also found was that when people weren't paying attention, they were not as happy.
Right.
Happiness correlates with being in the present. And they also figured, okay, we sleep a third of our lives. And if we're not paying attention half of the time, that's about a fourth of our life that we're actually awake and aware and present for. No wonder a lot of us feel numb or feel like we're sleepwalking through our lives because we're not even present for them.
Right.
Mindfulness is simply about paying attention. It's about bringing your mind back to the present. When you notice your mind is somewhere else, you bring it back, and you bring it back. Next time it goes, and you bring it back. And it's the act of redirecting your mind and bringing it back to the present that actually strengthens your frontal lobe pathways, which is your humanness and your intelligence. It allows you to override your emotional brain. And until you strengthen your frontal lobe, your emotional brain or your limbic system is pretty much in charge. And that's your emotions, because your brain's primary concern is always your safety.
Right.
Whether you survive, not your happiness. So left to its own devices with no training, your brain is always going to be at the mercy of your emotions.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be. You can train it so that your intelligent, cognitive thinking brain is in charge. And like you said, mindfulness is putting space between that emotional urge. I don't think that ever goes away. Like I said, with my anxiety, that's probably always going to be there. But now I can put a space in between that feeling and acting. And that is so helpful in addictions, in relationships, in work, in life.
Yeah.
I mean, it allowed me to feel like I'm in control of myself and my life. When you can control your mind, you're in control of your life.
Right. Because there's a whole bunch of circumstances we're never going to be able to control. Right.
Exactly.
There's a lot of stuff. And folks, we talk about it here. I talk about the behavior map, result cycle, circumstance, thought, feeling, action, result. Right. And this is all wrapped up into that. And the thing about what I appreciated about this book, and I think this is, and I know I've kind of been going all across the board here, folks. Again, there's so much information in it that I feel compelled, like I want to share so much of it with you. But what I really appreciated, Debbie, is the fact that if I think about it logically, it's kind of like the best of mindfulness information and tools and delivered in short, concise chapters. Like you can just dive into a chapter and learn something, learn a technique, learn, get a tip for how to employ mindfulness on a daily basis, journal prompt, things of that nature. And you can use that to build, because at the end of the day, mindfulness is a skill that we can continue to build and we can develop, and it's a strength and it's a muscle. And if we keep working at it, we get better and better at it. And I think that's really the ticket. You are somebody that you had to work really, really hard just to get your brain back online in a just a basic functioning capacity, right? And then you've gone on and now you're stretching it even further and developing and have developed a pretty keen skill set in terms of mindfulness. Is that a fair assessment?
Sure. And Molly, some of the people listening may not know my backstory, but I had depression for like decades. And I learned how to overreact and all kind of the things you shouldn't do when I was growing up. So when life got hard, my coping strategy was to try to end my life. And I attempted to do that 3 times. And the last time I put myself in the hospital for a week in a coma. And when I woke up, I was severely brain injured. And so I had to rebuild my life. My children got taken away. They moved out of state with their dad. So, I mean, if I thought things were bad before I tried in my life, they were much worse after. I couldn't talk. I couldn't, at first, I couldn't even walk correctly. I mean, I was severely brain injured. It took years to rebuild my brain and rebuild my life. And Western medicine really didn't have anything to offer me.
Mm-hmm.
I naturally healed a little bit during the first year. And the more I healed, I started learning about rehabilitating my brain and my life. And the more I learned about neuroplasticity, your brain, they used to believe that your brain was hardwired as an adult. But now we know that your brain never stops changing. Of course, it's more malleable and changes a whole lot when you're young. But your brain can and does change as an adult. And you can direct that change and influence and guide it by what you do, what you think. So I learned how to harness neuroplasticity to rehabilitate my brain. And in doing so, probably for the first time ever, I became mentally and emotionally and physically healthy because of what I was learning. And it was like the Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz. It was like I had the red slippers on all my life and didn't realize it. I had the power to change my life, change my emotions, change my brain. I didn't have to be a victim. And that's the message I want to get across to everyone is that we all have the power to change our lives and change our brains. And yes, we may need help doing that. I certainly went through therapy. I found a great therapist after the brain injury, even though I'd been in therapy for years. This one really helped. And she practiced cognitive behavioral therapy, which is mindfulness based.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it was a matter of the pupil was ready or I just found the right teacher, but it did make a difference. And it may involve medication. I'm not anti-medication, but a pill alone is not going to change your life, and it's not going to change your brain. It's not going to change your patterns of reacting. It can help initiate change, but the end goal is for you to take control.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a quick break to talk with you more about Sunnyside. Did you know that Sunnyside uses science to help you reach your goals by focusing on 3 scientifically proven superpowers that you have? Number 1, the power of pre-commitment. Each week, you set an intention for the week ahead that includes a tracking goal, a drink goal, and possibly a dry day goal. Number 2, the power of conscious interference. You'll learn the habit of tracking each day as soon as you finish it, which creates a mindful pause before you start the next day. And number 3, positivity. We know that this is a big step that can be tough at times, right? And that's why Sunnyside offers coaching through SMS and email to give you support, advice, and motivation. You can check out a free 15-day trial at www.sunnyside.co/Molly. That's www.sunnyside.co/Molly. Folks, I'll link Debbie's previous episode here on Alcohol Minimalist, where we shared a little bit more of the backstory in terms of and there was some alcohol misuse and things like that back in Debbie's earlier, before her transformation of her brain. But she and I share all the time with my group, and they know it, The Best Brain Possible. That's Debbie's site. And then really, really want you to pick up this new book, which is so amazing. And the title of this book is How to Use Mindfulness as a Mental Health Tool to Beat Depression and Anxiety and Change Your Brain. And it really is, like I said, I feel like it's kind of a culmination of everything that you've been learning and doing for many, many years now. Do you feel like this book was kind of the crown jewel of everything that you've learned along your journey?
I do, and I'm glad that you said it's in brief chapters and bite-sized chunks.
Yeah.
Because what I heard most from my first book, Beat Depression and Anxiety by Changing Your Brain, is that people liked the short chapters and the very direct, concrete information. This is what you can do, the steps.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought maybe with this one, I was way too scientific and verbose, and I did reduce it as much as I could. But I think one of my advantages is I'm not a neuroscientist or a mental health professional. And I always say I have to put it in ways that I can understand it. So even though it's very scientific information, I think it's doled out in easy to understand terms, like you're talking to a friend and they're telling you what worked for them.
Mm-hmm.
And these are all things that I wish somebody had told me, like back when I was struggling. And this is what I've learned through my journey. And hopefully you don't have to go through what I went through or anything similar. To all you've got to do is maybe pick up the book and learn via me and my bad experiences.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like you said, I mean, one of the things that I really appreciated about it is there's lots of science, lots of, I mean, like, yeah, 18 pages of reference. So it's very driven by research. And for some of us, what I think is really for me, when I was working on changing my relationship with alcohol, first of all, believing that I could change, understanding the science of neuroplasticity and understanding that my brain was capable of changing just was super important to my belief in my own self and my belief in my abilities, right? And for so long I had just held on to old stories about who I was and how I was, and did not see myself as someone who could, you know, not be a daily drinker. And didn't understand how much my thoughts fueled that desire and fueled that habit. Learning all of that, learning the science of it, helped me challenge some of those old thoughts that were just thoughts. And you talked a little bit, you talk about in the book, you shared Byron Katie's The Work, and about asking ourselves, is this, questions. And I share that with my audience, not the work specifically, but that question, what else is true? Is this true? And what else is true, right? Being able to look at how anything in our lives and really determine, like, is this actually a fact, or am I just imposing a narrative on it? And I would tell you that 90+% of the time people have, it's not a fact, it's a narrative. And that narrative is what's creating the feeling, not the actual circumstance itself. Right. And once we understand that, it really does give us agency in our lives. And when we have agency, yes, you're absolutely right. It's not all rainbows and unicorns. It does not mean that. But we also can build that emotional resilience and understand we are capable of handling those emotions, feeling uncomfortable, allowing that to be there. And we don't need to, we don't need to drink to try to cover that up. We don't need to try to numb ourselves or buffer it away. And I really believe that this is, I mean, for me, learning this was the key, not only to changing my relationship with alcohol, but just like you said, it's the key to having a better life, right? And that doesn't mean a happier, better, always happier, but actually can mean happier, because once you understand, like, you're not the victim, you're not helpless, you're not a leaf being blown around, but you actually are the person that's writing the story, that you're you are the artist, you are the music maker, you are the one creating this. And it's in the power of your own thinking that it really exists.
What a lot of people don't understand, Molly, is those repetitive thought patterns and narratives actually shape your brain.
Right.
And they become the default messages in your brain. And alcoholism and addiction are brain patterns. Your brain becomes sensitized to this, then this, because of a neurochemical called dopamine. And so your brain becomes sensitized to drinking or any addiction. And to change that pattern, you have to change your physical brain. And mindfulness has proven very effective in all kinds of addictions, because it's not a cure-all, but it helps a person put space in between their urges. There's even a form of mindfulness specifically for addiction called urge surfing.
Right.
But it puts space in between those urges. I mean, it really, you can think of it like OCD. It's following your brain's urge. And what you have to do is insert your frontal lobe, your cognitive thinking, and overpower your limbic system urges.
Yeah.
I mean, regardless whether it's drinking, taking any kind of drug, watching,
scrolling social media, doing
exactly.
right.
I mean, it's all the same sequence in your brain. And what has to happen is you have to interrupt that sequence. And mindfulness helps you do that.
Yeah. I have a tool here, folks, that I talk about all the time. I call it the PB&J because we can visualize a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and that's always a nice thing, right? But it stands for P for pause, right? So we're going to pause, and then we're going to B, breathe. We're going to take some deep breaths, and then we're going to J, just for just 10 minutes. We're going to pause, breathe, and just 10 minutes. And exactly what you're talking about. It's a mindfulness tool, right? It's ways to incorporate and increase the power. I love the Viktor Frankl quote. It's in between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is where all of our power lies, right? It's that power of the pause in between the stimulus and response. And being mindful is all about extending that space and really employing our agency to be able to choose not just to react, but to actually respond, right? We're not just going to allow that lower brain to take over and to be driving the show, but we're going to choose how it is that we want to. And I love the fact that inside the book you talk about, and I like I said, I could talk for hours. We will wrap it up with this. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting that you brought up is in this digital world, right, where we are like inundated with. It's amazing that we can pay attention at all, right? Because there's a lot of things vying for our attention. And some people would say that devices and apps and everything else are the antithesis of mindfulness. But you actually talk a little bit about that's not entirely true, right?
It's how you use them.
Right.
They actually can reinforce a mindfulness practice. I mean, it's up to you again. It's how you direct your attention and how you use the tools that are before you.
Right. Yeah. Well, and like I said, folks, this book has so much great information in it. It is in bite-sized chapters that do make it easy to digest. And it's not what I appreciated about it is it's something that you can go back. It's kind of like a reference, I think is what I would say. It's a reference tool for continuing to come back. And when you want to keep practicing mindfulness, you can go back and say, oh, what was that again? And it's all right there. It's all in this book. So it's a really useful tool, a useful resource, and something that I think you will really enjoy having in your arsenal, especially for those of us that enjoy the science and we want the science there and we want it easily accessible at our fingertips instead of having to go find all of those studies that Debbie did it for you. So she literally pulled it all together into this book, and I just thank you so much for taking the time to be here, Debbie. And I appreciate you sticking with me in my, like I said, in my enthusiasm for the work. I probably have gone a little bit awry a few times in our conversation, but I appreciate you sticking with me.
I'm glad you found it so helpful. I mean, that's makes me very appreciative, and that's why I wrote it. I wanted to make mindfulness simplified and accessible to the average person because I think it can appear complicated or this or that, and it doesn't have to be. It can be whatever you need it to be, and you can adapt it and find what works for you. There is enough different flavors that you can find something that you like that will help you.
Yeah. And it really is it's the best tool available, folks. Your brain, your beautiful, brilliant human brain. And that's why I appreciate your work over at Best Brain Possible. I will link everything in the show notes, folks. You can find Debbie there, and certainly we'll put a link in the notes for how to pick up this book as well. Debbie Hampton, thank you so much for being back on the show.
Thank you so much, Molly. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast. Take something you learned from this week's episode and put it into action. Changing your drinking habits and creating a peaceful relationship with alcohol is 100% possible. You can stop worrying, stop feeling guilty about overdrinking, and become someone who desires alcohol less. I work with people in 3 ways. You can learn about them over at www.mollywatts.com/workwithme. Or better yet, reach out to me directly. It's molly@mollywatts.com. We'll jump on a call and discuss what's best for you. This podcast is really just the beginning of our conversation. Let's keep it going.